All right, welcome to the webinar for two competitions focused on NOAA's Climate Ecosystems Fisheries Initiative for the FY24 Climate Program Office Notice of Funding Opportunity. So this webinar will focus on talks about the Climate Ecosystem Fisheries Initiative that's relevant for, again, these two competitions that CVP and MAP programs are sponsoring. Next slide.
Let me put up the other presentation.
So while we're waiting, I'm Jenny Sells. I'm the program manager for the Climate Variability and Predictability Program. And we'll also hear from Dan Barry, who is the program manager for the Modeling, Analysis, Predictions, and Projections program. And Jose Algarin is a program specialist in the Climate Variability and Predictability program. So today we are going to hear from Roger Griffiths at the National Marine Fishery Service, Michael Alexander at Oceanic and Atmospheric Research, and Vincent Saba at National Marine Fishery Service. Next slide. And I will turn it over to Dan to introduce MAP.
Great, thanks Jenny, can you hear me?
Yes.
Perfect, and apologies that I was late. My last call went a little bit over. So yeah, hi everyone. Thanks for joining and taking the time to hear about these two competitions. I'm going to give a very brief introduction to the MAP program and then talk a little bit about our competition for FY24. So MAP is a program that's focused on climate modeling, helping to develop climate models at GFDL and NOAA, and then working on applications of those climate models. A major application of NOAA's climate modeling and GFDL's climate modeling over recent years has been in the area of marine ecosystems, and particularly the NOAA Fisheries mission with CEFI now, the Climate Ecosystems and Fisheries Initiative that you're going to hear more about on this call. And we have been supporting some of the groundwork for that initiative over the past decade or so, working on predictability, seasonal prediction of marine ecosystems, and working on product development based on model information on those timescales, largely seasonal to interannual timescales. So now that we have matured at NOAA in terms of our capabilities and have this vision through the initiative, we are supporting really concentrated efforts to further develop the platforms, models, and systems that are going to be used going forward in support of the Climate Ecosystems and Fisheries Initiative at the agency. So we have this solicitation this year that is focused largely on advancing modeling systems. I think one of the distinctions that you'll get here between CVP and MAP is that our solicitation, especially in this iteration, is very focused on the modeling platforms themselves, developing those platforms, applying those platforms, and doing research to help with that process. So there's some motivation on this slide about, of course, the importance of this research area, the massive economic role that fisheries play in our society, the importance of sustaining those fisheries, but also maximizing the economic productivity and using forward-looking information to be able to achieve that goal most effectively. You can go to the next slide, please. So the solicitation, this particular cycle has a couple of major focus areas. The first focus area is really on advancing general methodologies for prediction and projection of marine ecosystems. So this work can use a variety of modeling platforms or data sources to think about different aspects of how you would set up prediction and projection systems, things like initialization, bias correction, resolution, model formulation, and complexity. These different kinds of aspects of prediction and projection systems that you have to design for effective performance of those systems. And the second focus area is really on advancing what has been a very concerted effort in the agency to use this regional implementation of the MOM6 model to be able to set up prediction and projection systems in the large marine ecosystem regions of the U.S. Across the U.S. waters. And as you're going to hear, we've had a lot of work already in the agency and through MAP-funded projects and other projects to develop the grid that's going to be used in the Northwest Atlantic region. But there's been a little bit less work or less advanced work at this point in the other regions that are called out in the solicitation. And so we're looking for team efforts to really team up with NOAA labs, fisheries science centers, and the external community to try to help advance the construction and design and operation of these modeling systems in the other major ocean regions of the U.S. and also the Great Lakes as well. So we're looking for projects that can help advance these two areas. There are many more details in the MAP information sheet, so please make sure that you look at that to get some more guidance on who your collaborators should be, what types of topics in particular you can focus on, what's inside and outside the boundary conditions of the solicitation and what we're looking for. I think it got cut off a little bit on the bottom here, the bottom of the slide, but proposers can ask for up to 190K per year of resources for up to 3 years for these type 1 or type A projects, the smaller projects that are focused on this first bullet point that has advanced methodologies in bold. And then also projects that are looking at more of the systems development, which has a higher ceiling on the funding per year, also 3-year projects. The funding amount is 275 to 350K per year, because those are likely going to be larger, more interdisciplinary teams to work on setting those modeling systems up and testing them. So feel free to contact me with more questions on this particular solicitation for MAP. You can reach out my emails here on the slide and also in the information sheet. And I hope that this is really a helpful description of the MAP competition. And again, don't hesitate to reach out. MAP also posted a webinar on its website that gives more information about how to apply things like LOIs, due dates, review process, and whatnot. So I encourage you to take a look at that as well. There's also a question and answer form on that page if you want to submit a question specifically to the MAP program. So take a look at the MAP page on the CPO website. So that's it from me. Thanks, Ginny.
All right, thanks, Dan. So the Climate Variability and Predictability Program has another competition, so a separate competition information sheet. And Dan kind of highlighted the competition information sheets. If you're new to NOAA, just a reminder, we have our Notice of Funding Opportunity, and then there are separate standalone documents that are competition information sheets. And so you have to look at 2 different PDFs to get this information. And if you have questions about that, feel free to email Dan or myself. CVP also has an informational webinar posted on the CPO funding opportunities website that's more nuts and bolts, how to apply to the competition, and walks through the competition information sheet. So CVP's competition is a bit more zoomed out and broader and focuses on soliciting projects that are coupled or ocean model process studies linked with observational data analysis to better understand physical and biogeochemical ocean processes. And CVP is really interested in advancing understanding of sources of predictability, variability and change of indicators or ocean variables very relevant to fisheries, as well as their mechanistic drivers. And there's also an emphasis on considering multiple scales and linkages between local and remote forcing and large-scale climate phenomena and small-scale ocean features. And so CVP has an emphasis on similar regions that are called out in the Climate Ecosystems Fisheries Initiative. And we, as well at CVP, encourage applicants to connect with OAR labs, fishery science centers, other entities in NOAA working on this initiative. And so we really expect projects, while they're more kind of grounded in foundational research, to link to how research results will further improvements in either kind of NOAA's observing for these this initiative or NOAA modeling systems for this initiative. And so we do still want to see how knowledge gained in the research projects is feeding into these larger questions about the NOAA observing and modeling systems. Funding for these projects is up to $250 per year for 3 years. And we do expect CVP funded investigators to join a task force with MAP investigators after projects have been awarded. And so with that, I think we can turn it over to our first speaker, Roger Griffiths. And
thank you, Jenny. Was that my cue? Thank you so much.
It is.
Great, thank you. It's such a pleasure to be here. Thank you, Ginny and Dan, for your support of the Climate Ecosystems and Fisheries Initiative, and you're helping us advance this really important system. So my job here is just to describe a little bit more about what this initiative is and what this nationwide operational system we're trying to build we hope will look like, and the importance of this call and the research that you all are considering. So next slide, please. So CEFI is really important because there's this urgent need for climate-informed advice to help guide our management of fisheries and other living marine resources in the nation. These are some of the challenging questions that, of course, we're all wrestling with now. How will the changing oceans affect the distribution and abundance of fish stocks? What will be the risks to fisheries, the industries, the communities and economies that depend on them? And then what are the best management strategies to reduce those risks and promote adaptation? Aquaculture, protected species, and of course the coastal communities that depend on them all are facing similar questions about how do we prepare for the impacts of changing oceans on these resources and the people that depend on them. Next slide, please. So those were the foundation of the drivers for developing this Climate Ecosystems and Fisheries Initiative. This effort began about 4 years ago, based on a whole lot of other conversations within the agency, to try and pull together a cross-NOAA effort to provide that climate-informed advice for marine resource management and community adaptation. It builds, as Dan and Ginny mentioned, it builds on existing NOAA investments in research modeling and the decision-making process we have. So we're poised and ready to put this end-to-end system, decision support system together, and it's designed to address 4 key requirements: that reliable delivery of robust ocean forecasts, hydrocasts, predictions and projections, which is really the focus of these 2 competitions, and then the operational production of climate-informed ecosystem projections and the risk assessments, and ultimately the adaptation strategies and advice we need to be climate ready. It's also designed to increase the decision maker capacity to then use that information, and the whole system is designed to constantly be validating and innovating through targeted research and observations. And that's again how a key way that these calls for proposals and research efforts will play a key role in helping us build the system. Next slide, please. So here's a cartoon version of how we envision this CEFI decision support system looking like. It is built on these Earth system models that Dan described, and that are then delivered through regional ocean modeling efforts. That's the foundation for then providing that information to regional decision support teams through an information hub to provide easy access and management of that information, so that these regional decision support teams at the NIMS Fishery Science Centers can begin turning that information into the biological projections and the assessments of best management strategies. And all of this done in collaboration with decision makers, from fishery managers to industries to the coastal communities that depend on them. And again, that blue box on the bottom is absolutely critical to this system functioning. The targeted research and observations to continue to test, validate, and promote innovation of the entire system, from the climate and ocean modeling all the way through the ecological and biological modeling and the advice. Next slide, please. So this is just a reminder to me to say to you that, and Dan mentioned this already, much of the focus here is how can we bring the advanced Earth system modeling tools, particularly the MOM6 ocean modeling products, how can we regionalize those and make them available into this system in region by region over the next couple, 3 years. That's a key part of the call that Dan described. Next slide, please. And the system depends on, go ahead, next slide, please. Thank you. The CEFI system is then has these regional teams that are able to customize those ocean hindcasts, forecasts, and projections and deliver them to the decision support teams in each region for developing the advice. Next slide, please. And if everything works well, this is the envisioned flow of information and products from the regional ocean model projections to the decision support teams that are then turning that into projections of how habitats and species distributions may change, how the abundance or productivity of those species may change, all the way through tipping points and thresholds. That's then used through in a variety of ways, through risk assessments, stock assessments, and then regional applications, including fisheries management, aquaculture practices, and even protected species conservation. Next slide, please. So in summary, I hope I've given you a glimpse into the CEFI decision support system that we're trying to build. This is, again, designed to be an operational system from the climate and ocean modeling components all the way through to the ecological and human dimension modeling and projections and the delivery of climate-informed advice for living marine resource or fisheries management. I want to end by, again, thanking Ginny and Dan for their support and their bringing these two calls and these research efforts to help support our NOAA-wide effort to build this system. The research that you all are promoting here is absolutely critical to helping put the system together. So thank you.
Thank you, Roger. And our next speaker is going to be Mike Alexander. And I should have mentioned we'll have a question and answer and discussion session after we're done with all of these talks. And so there will be time for you to ask your questions. All right, Mike.
Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Great. So yeah, I'm Mike Alexander. I work in the physical science lab here in Boulder, Colorado. They initially asked Charlie Stock and Mike Jaycox, who are leading kind of the modeling component of CEFI, to present. They're both on vacation, so for better or worse, you have me. So why don't we go to the next slide? Okay, so perhaps you're familiar with these kind of time-space diagrams. And from the climate side, we might be pretty familiar with the kind of physical processes that are shown by those light blue bubbles, going from things like hurricanes and tropical storms on kind of daily timescales to global phenomena like ENSO, AMO, and global warming. But what we may be less familiar with is kind of linking those to fishery or habitat relevant processes or products. And so this bottom diagram kind of shows those kind of things. For example, on annual timescales, things like catch limits, rebuilding plans, and protected areas. Whether can fishermen use information to help decide whether they'll purchase a new boat. So that's the industry long-term resource capitalization, and then long-term planning for resilience and sustainability of certain fisheries. Okay, next please. So you've seen this from Roger. So I'm going to focus basically on the leftmost, the regional ocean modeling and some science aspects that would go along with that, including thinking about comparable data sets like ocean reanalyses or coastal observations. And so that bottom thing on the white, I'll just read it. That's a statement that Charlie put in, including balance, strengthen institutional capacity for this core need with continuing training of co-development innovative partners. So I guess it's saying that there's already kind of a community that are developing these models, and additional people coming in to help develop the system, improve the models are very welcome. Okay, next please. So have you seen this kind of overview from Roger about the regional ocean model systems, the configurations that are kind of currently under development, going from right to left? There's the Northwest Atlantic, and that one's probably furthest along. There's already been some simulations that are, I would say, almost operational, done with it. And there's a paper that's submitted that kind of describes in detail the regional model for that particular domain. The other two areas shown here are the Arctic region, and then the entire, basically, west coast of North America, all the way up into the Arctic Ocean. So these models have a resolution on the order of 5 to 10 kilometers. So the Northwest Atlantic is a 12th of a degree model. In addition to the physics of it, it has biogeochemistry, and now that's the cobalt system developed at GFDL, and that has 40 different variables. So very, very complete BGC model. There'll be historical simulations, projections of future conditions, probably out to 2100, ensembles of seasonal forecasts and decadal forecasts. So those are kind of in the works and what's being thought about for these different model configurations. And then it'll be open development, especially through this process, this call, with the modeling teams and training people to help improve the modeling systems. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so here's an example from the Northwest Atlantic Regional MOM 6. And this is from just a single month from a simulation that's been performed from 1993 through 2019. And the boundary conditions come from both atmosphere and ocean reanalyses. So on the far right, you can see a map of sea surface temperatures, and you can see the very fine scales features, including the kind of the loop current in the Gulf of Mexico, the Gulf Stream, and further north, the cold temperatures kind of associated with Labrador Current that kind of hug the coast. You can also see what the oxygen content looks like in the middle panel. And then on the far left is bottom temperature, which is critical for many marine species like lobster and flounder. So we needed this fine resolution to truly resolve coast-wide features. Okay, next please. So while there's a strong modeling component, clearly we need reanalysis, say, for driving these regional ocean models and also validating them. And so in the last several years, there's been ocean reanalysis that are since about 30 years long, and they have a resolution of less than, finer than 10 kilometers for many of them. So this provides a nice source of information for both studies using them themselves or doing model validation using these ocean reanalysis. Many save almost all save the monthly data on multiple levels, and some also provide daily fields. In addition to reanalysis, there's obviously a suite of satellite products and in situ measurements like Argo floats. And something that kind of came up with from an ecological forecasting workshop that was held last spring is just gathering coastal observation, what's available, how can they be used in combination with models and reanalysis to address CEFI relevant issues. Okay, next please. So here's some potential science topics. Some of these are we're kind of pursuing in our lab here, but just across NOAA, they're of strong interest. So these include studies of extremes like marine heat waves, and also multiple stressors. So say a combination of high temperature and low oxygen. And while many of the studies have looked at surface marine heat waves, for example, using SST data, with both the models and reanalysis, we can look over the full water column. Okay, so also interactions across scales and variables. For example, interactions between the physics and biogeochemistry, and across scales would be the influence of like climate variability, such as ENSO on coastal conditions. As we talked about before, there's model development, especially regional MOM6 ocean model, and then methods to improve and evaluate forecasts, including like boundary forcing, sets of using ensembles versus the resolution of the model. Also, I would say including empirical or statistical methods to make forecasts, which could also provide benchmarks for the dynamical forecasts. More effective use of observations and reanalysis in coastal regions. And finally, using physics and biogeochemical information to inform fishery applications. And just one example here is habitat compression. So if our regions that are beneficial for certain species now, do they become smaller over time due to climate change? Okay, so I believe that's all I have. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Mike. So before we move to the question and answer session, I wanted to give Vince Saba some time to maybe provide some remarks on how these competitions can be relevant to kind of the regional questions that fishery science centers are asking.
Yeah, thanks, Jenny. I think Mike gave a pretty good overview of some of the modeling capabilities. In terms of what's needed from the fishery science centers, the majority of management decisions within our commercial fishery stocks are still mostly single species based. So they're using traditional stock assessment methods. And one thing that's been challenging for us, and it's particular in stock assessment, is getting that climate information into the assessment process, whether that's ecosystem level science, ecosystem type variables like chlorophyll, productivity, zooplankton production, things like that, let alone things like historical temperature. And one of the reasons is that some of our observations in terms of our in situ observations in the oceans are somewhat limited. And so we heavily rely on these ocean model reanalyses and hindcasts that go back in time and are able to fill in those survey gaps. And so from a stock assessment management perspective, and this applies to protected species as well, having high skill or more skillful hindcasts is one of the most critical things that we need right now. And then once we're able to assess those models and use them in historical analyses for protected species or commercial stocks, we can then use those models in forecast mode and projection mode to then inform management. So I think that's my biggest take-home message from a fishery science center perspective. And I think most of my colleagues would agree that we do need to fill in those gaps. And when we talk about variables like biogeochemistry, like I mentioned earlier, things like chlorophyll, dissolved oxygen, Mike showed a slide on the MOM6 historical prediction for dissolved oxygen. These things are important variables for many different stocks and protected species that we deal with. And so having those gaps filled in is critical so that we can identify those climate relationships, environmental relationships in the historical period, and then use them going forward to inform management. So I think, Gene, that's about all I needed to say. So I'll be happy to answer questions later when the time comes.
Thanks, Vince. So
Sure.
now our question and answer period. And so I'd ask that all panelists and speakers come back on if they're able on camera, and we'll open it up for questions. And one thing to note about the questions is that you are anonymous, and so the other participants can't see who asks questions, and Jose will be reading those off. as anonymous. If you'd like to come off of mute, we can unmute you and you can ask your question yourself. Just let Jose know. So you kind of have the option of remaining anonymous or coming off chat and letting us know who you are.
We already have a question. And so this question is, are protected species, for example, whale and dolphin populations, considered under fisheries for this NOFO?
I think maybe it would be good if Roger could just address that distinction between like the fisheries and sanctuaries missions, perhaps as one dimension. Roger, if you're comfortable tackling that. And
Yeah,
then I could
happy
provide
to.
kind of a program follow-on.
Yeah, happy to. Obviously, so we have multiple missions within the National Marine Fisheries Service, driven by different laws, and we do manage both fisheries, and we have responsibilities to protect marine mammals. I think was particularly what the question was about under Marine Mammal Protection Act, and those are different missions. But what I'll say is that the reason I may have muddied the waters here a little bit is that the information we need about future oceans is basically the same to make climate-informed decisions for both those groups. So this call and the CEFI system that we're trying to build is intended, well, the CEFI system is intended to deliver climate-related information about future oceans and to inform both those missions, both fisheries and protected species of marine mammals. I give it back to you, Dan, as far as what piece of that you intended the call to focus on. I know the CAFA call has been focused on climate and fisheries, not including protected species, but the CEFI is intended to serve both multiple and protected areas. Thanks.
Yeah, that's really helpful, Roger. So the way that I would put it to build on what Roger said is that the intention of this call is very focused on specifically the fisheries line office mission. So if you can articulate how that work is relevant to the fisheries mission, that's great. CVP and MAP do also have active investments working with the sanctuaries program at NOAA, where some of those issues that are talked about in the question may be a little bit more germane in the sanctuaries domain. CEFI is trying to develop systems that are going to be useful for multiple different mission spaces at NOAA. So a lot of the data and modeling platforms would be useful both for protected resources, sanctuaries mission, but also the fisheries mission as well. However, we do have other funding calls likely in the future that would be focused more on like that sanctuaries type of mission, if that's what the question asker was inquiring about.
Second question, is collaboration with regional MOM6 team required? In other words, does CVP and MAP discourage submissions using different modeling platforms to address the science questions?
I can start from the CVP perspective. You do not have to collaborate with regional modeling teams. Collaboration with NOAA is encouraged, but not required. And multi-model approaches are welcome. For the CVP perspective, you can use multiple approaches to investigate questions. However, in the proposal, again, we do ask that the proposal kind of articulate how the project is relevant to NOAA, thinking about how knowledge gained from the project will feed into and inform NOAA's observing and modeling systems. And so I think you can do that, but just keep that in mind when crafting your proposal.
Yeah, on the map side, you know, a lot of this is articulated in the information sheet, so I encourage you to take a look at that, and that's the final word on it. But in brief, we have two categories of projects, as I mentioned, A and B. The A projects do not have to use MOM6 as the platform. They could use other platforms, other data sets other than MOM6. For Part B, the projects do have to use MOM6 because the goal there is really kind of an R2O goal, ultimately, of getting to a future world in which we have implementations of MOM6 for all of the major large marine ecosystem areas, including the Great Lakes as well. So it's no to A and yes to B in terms of whether you have to use MOM6.
And
All right. Oh, sorry.
before we move on, did anybody else want to comment on kind of research that's ongoing in this area at NOAA that might use other models besides MOM6?
I know that ROMS is a very, heavily used model and is may still be used by NOS in terms of some of their products. So I can envision studies using ROMS or comparisons between MOM6 and ROMS as being valuable.
All right. We have a question from Dean Overland, and I'm going to unmute Jim. Go ahead, Jim, with your question.
Good morning, Jim Overland from PMEL. It sounds a lot like you're talking about model development and tuning against reanalyses. I'm interested in what your ideas are on how to go about the decadal projection, particularly dealing with interannual variability.
Do you want me to? Sorry.
Yeah, I think that might be more of a question for Mike. I'm not totally sure how to handle that from the program perspective.
Because, I mean, could that fall into either one of our competitions? I guess I need to look more at your competition information sheet. But I'll let Mike.
Yeah, so the from all aspects, I think looking at, interannual variability is a key part from, role of ENSO or in, the forecasts over the next year to, there are plans for, decadal predictions and century long projections, and interannual variability would fall into all those. In terms of, for example, is there going to be a change in ENSO going out in the future, or even if one is using ensembles, the natural variability in the system will cause the ensembles to spread. So even from kind of a understanding signal to noise and the reliability of forecasts, it's important to understand the variability in addition to long-term change.
And so I think developing questions around that would be appropriate for the CVP competition if you're looking at what's driving variability and how that's being influenced or how that's relevant to fisheries.
And I'll just mention from the map perspective that, like CVP and CEFI, it's cross time scale, so it does cover the time scales, Jim, that you're mentioning. And I'll just read a piece of text from the info sheet for the map competition, which focuses on one potential focus area for a project. So the info sheet says experimenting with or analyzing model configurations that may help advance the representation of known sources of skill for seasonal to decadal LME prediction. So I think that is kind of a yes in response to your question.
The one thing that we do point out in both the map and the CVP competition information sheets is that you can only apply to one of the competitions between those two.
We do have another question, and this is for me, I guess. Will the slides for this webinar will be made available? We'll post the webinar. So the webinar is being recorded right now. We're going to post the webinar by the end of this week or early next week into our website, so you can see the entire webinar there. And I'm not seeing any other questions in the chat or in the Okay, there's one now. Follow-up question. Is it possible to be lead PI on one and co-PI on the other? I guess this person is talking about maybe be a PI on the CVP one and being a co-PI on the MAP one.
Yep, I think I want to look at the competition sheet again because I'm pretty sure that's allowed, but I just want to double check to see what we landed on.
Yeah, I mean, I'll say like, so Ginny and I maybe haven't talked about this exactly, but I could say like from the MAP perspective, and Ginny, if you agree with this on CVP, we can kind of state it here, that MAP very, very frequently has applications with individuals serving on multiple proposals as lead or co-investigator. So I've always been fine with that in MAP. I'm not sure what the CVP practice is, but that's fine from the MAP perspective.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure we were consistent because there is language in the CVP competition information sheet at least. So you should only submit one application to either the CVP competition or the MAP CEFI related competition as lead PI. You can be co-I on however many proposals you want, but as lead, you should decide whether you're submitting a proposal to MAP or CVP.
Will there be a webinar on the other MAP call for proposals, the process-oriented diagnostics for NOAA climate model improvement and applications?
Yeah, so MAP posted a recording last week on all three of our competitions, including the CEFI one, the PO diagnostics, and the early career competition. And I will share a link in the chat. Hopefully, everybody would be able to get a link out of there, Jose.
Yep.
Okay. I'll share a link to the page where that recording is posted. And I mentioned this in my comments at the beginning, but there's also a Google form there so you can submit questions to the program on our other competitions as well.
And I just checked, the applicant language is the same in both the MAP and the CVP calls. So that information is consistent across the competition information sheets.
Next one is, can you please clarify which two competition numbers to find these competitions sheets under?
So if you go to our funding opportunities webpage and you scroll all the way to the bottom, you'll see a list of competition information sheets. So CVP's competition information number is on the webpage and MAP's competition information number is on the webpage. So I can read those out now, but I would really encourage everybody to go to the webpage, find the competition information sheets, and get your information that way, because there's really good information in there for the LOIs and for relevance, et cetera.
And I'm not seeing any other questions for now.
Just mention that I put the link in the chat, so hopefully whomever asked that question can grab that link to the MAP page for all three of our competitions.
Do any of the speakers or panelists have any questions for each other or have any questions for Dan and I?
I'm good.
I'm good too, just a whole lot of thanks.
All right, any last comments? Great, well, thank you so much everyone for your time. We look forward to getting your LOIs and reading through the LOIs. And if you have questions, please reach out to Dan or myself and we'll try to get you answers. And with that, that is the end of our webinar.
And remember that this was recorded and will be posted to the website soon. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Jose. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.